In this podcast, we're going to go over the idea of government budgeting, which might be a little bit over certain people's heads. I know it's going to be a little bit out of the way with the normal history ideas that I've been going after, but it's actually going to be very important. Obviously, people, if they would have watched the first introduction, they would have understood that I have a public administration degree, a master's degree, in which I got a 3.83 GPA. So this is kind of my wheelhouse as well as history is. So I'll be also going over a lot of things like this as well. So when it comes to public budgeting, you have to make the decision with it in which way you want to put your money. In this episode, we'll be going over do we want the idea of public aid, or do we want to go with the idea of charity? Because these are two major ideas with it. Certain people tend to think of it has to be a moral argument. Well, it's not really a moral argument, because the fact is where this money has come from to begin with. You have to understand it is coming from the taxpayer to begin with. So you are pulling money from the actual people themselves, and even though you're giving the money out to people, you're essentially taking it from people themselves to begin with. So essentially, you need to make the decision: is it better to leave the money there to begin with and let charity take care of these issues for the poor people, or is it better for government to handle it, take the money and handle it themselves? Now now with this, we need to make the decision of, do people actually give money to charity? Now, I've had people come up to me and state that the U.S. is not a charitable nation, and without public aid, the poor would starve to death, and because of this, without public aid, you would have people starving to death, and all these people would be dead on the streets, and all of this stuff would happen. But I think this is not exactly true. If you look at just even the example, I'm going to give a great example. Irish YouTuber Jacksepticeye, whose real first name is Sean, he's done different charity events on YouTube, and these have raised usually well surpassing their actual amount that they expect to be coming in. And just in the Christmas one in last December, they expected about 250,000 in earnings during the actual time of the actual YouTube telethon, and they received well over $300,000. That's over what's that? Over 20% of a bump of what they were expecting. Now, this shows that if people were not charitable, they would not be receiving the money that they are getting from charity. And if this were the case, and that people would not be charitable, if people were not charitable, he should not be reaching anywhere close to his goal. Now, in that case, that goal was for crisis text line, and you'll see more. I'll put a link to his page in the description, so you can see more about him. He's a gamer with quite a few followers, but beyond the point of having quite a few followers, it's not the amount of the followers that you have. It's the act that you do with it, and what percentage beyond your expectations you're getting, and that actually proves your point. On these charity drives, how much is he getting? Is he meeting, and is he exceeding his amount? He just had recently a drive in January for raising money for Make-A-Wish Foundation. Now, technically in January is when people in the United States are essentially recouping from a lot of Christmas spending, and they're going to be short on money. He was still able to raise over $100,000, and that's just during this time. That doesn't include any type of money that comes from any merchandise or any type of money that will come after this point. That's still going to be going toward this charity that are going to be coming through his name. It's only coming from the actual direct time that this event is happening. Now, this one was specifically for Make-A-Wish was about 6 hours, and that's quite a lot of money within a 6 hour period to raise $100,000. Now, this shows that if one person with a good amount of followers on YouTube can do that, it shows that people aren't exactly not willing to give, and that charity isn't exactly dead in the United States. And this is someone that's doing it from outside the country. And and this time around he did it from his place in Ireland instead of coming out to Los Angeles as he did with the case for the Christmas drive, and bring in people as he did with the Christmas drive. This was just himself doing it. Now he's planning on doing one per month, so anybody that sees this, I hope they can be able to donate to this, because this will help for the different causes, and it will really help generate money to help a bunch of people. But beyond this point with it, this kind of proves that you don't need public aid, that there is plenty of generous people out there in the United States. This is not exactly a country of people who need public aid. You don't need funding for any program. Not one program out there actually needs funding publicly. We have plenty of people that are more than willing to donate money. There's celebrities that are willing to put their name on a building just for what it calls notoriety or whatnot. We can get that to cover any type of medical needs for the people that cannot afford medical care, instead of actually having it come toward taxation, which is really something that was not ever meant in the first place. I mean, we have doctors who actually do pro bono activities, such as people like Rand Paul, who do pro bono eye surgeries during his downtime. And this is something that is never really discussed in the media, and what needs to be discussed. But what they're more concerned with is the impact of, we need more money for our public aid, because a lot of that money gets chewed up in administrative costs. It doesn't really go down to the actual people who need it, and this is the major problem that people don't look at. And when people look at this whole situation, they don't see that. They see, oh, we need to help people, so we need to raise taxes. Well, when you raise taxes, you have a government bureaucracy handle it. It doesn't get to where it needs to be. That's why when you make all these situations like this, that's such as coming up with the idea of universal health care. Universal health care will have two options. Either A, it's going to be very, very limited in scope of what you can get, such as rationed health care, and because there's only going to be so much money that can go in, and a lot of it's going to be administrative overlook on everything. And being told that, no, you're too old, you can't have that surgery, you're going to have to die, because of the actual limitations on the actual program, or you're going to have a program that's going to be so bloated that it's going to take up so much of the budget, and taxation is going to be so high it's not even going to be affordable. this is what ends up happening when you have a bureaucracy doing that. And it's going to allow for a lot of waste and abuse within the system, because people are going to want to figure out a way to make money, because nobody's looking around the corner at that. And it takes a long time to figure out all of this waste and abuse, because the government's going to say, hey, it's not my money that's getting wasted. These are having a third party do it. This third party's paying for it, so you're basically, they don't care that a taxpayer is paying for it. And when you view universal health care, it's not the government paying for it. You're really paying for it. It's just a matter of you're not directly seeing the bill until tax time comes. And when tax time comes, you're going to be realizing that you're not getting what you thought you were paying for. And this will happen when it comes to a lot of other services, such as if you want free education. The more free things that you request in public aid, such as free education, free housing, free this, that, and the other, it's going to cost, because every time you do that to the government, they're going to want administration on every level, and it just adds cost to every level. And then what ends up happening is the quality goes down. If you notice, our levels in education have actually plummeted ever since we established a Department of Education under Jimmy Carter. Now this is a direct cause of what happens when you actually put more bureaucracy in the system. The more bureaucracy in the system, the worse the actual outcome becomes. And if you want to actually make things better, you need to eliminate this and actually allow the system to grow. This is why countries like South Korea are beating the hell out of the United States in education. They're much lower in cost, and yet they handsomely reward the best teachers, and the worst teachers get the lowest salaries. This is the way it is. There's teachers in South Korea that are making more of the best teachers that are making more than some of the best athletes in the country. So this is the way it has become. What they do is they actually teach classes over the internet, and this is allowing them to have thousands upon thousands of students each day, and it allows them to actually have a salary equal to the millions of dollars each year. Now, the poorest quality of the teachers end up basically getting fired. Now, because of the situation of bureaucracies and unions, they're not going to allow this. They want to basically keep the median going up. They'd rather have the worst teacher making higher salaries than actually the best teacher making insanely high salaries. And this is where you get these issues. And you basically get teachers that are basically receiving huge benefit packages that really have no business receiving it. You get teachers basically, they get tenure when tenure should never be offered to anyone, regardless of what they've had during their career. You should be earning a living just like anyone else, and you should never be blocked from any type of firing for incompetence. This is basically where you need to have a job to where you should not be judged on a lower credential than anyone else just because you've been there for quite some time. And this is why our level of education is where we're running at about like 23rd in the world, when South Korea is basically in every stat is top 5, and yet their cost for education is well lower than ours. Ours is, we're spending more than anyone in the world, and yet we're basically running about 25th in the nation, if not lower, Yet they're running top 5 in every category except for cost, in which the cost is well below that. The cost is they're running between 15th to 20th depending on what level of schooling for per student, which is well below us. We could actually be at this level, but the fact is we're spending way too much money on all of this administration, bureaucracy, paying for teachers that don't deserve it. And this is what happens when you get all of this stuff of public aid of, oh, every teacher deserves to have this great salary. Well, that should not be the case. This is more stuff that goes into the budget and really is thought of as public aid, because when you say everybody deserves a free education, this needs to be thought into the thing, because when you give people bad educations, this is the outcome. You're giving them bad free educations. They learn nothing. They learn garbage when they're being taught totally wrong information. What exactly is the value of that free education? They just got ripped off. That free education isn't even worth the free amount that they paid for it, because they're still paying in taxes. Even if they weren't paying in taxes, it wouldn't even be worth free, because essentially they were told the wrong things during the whole time with it. They're essentially going to have to relearn everything that they were exactly taught. It isn't even education. What most of them are getting is indoctrination into complete and utter garbage. When they're being told that basically is socialism and communism are great and they've never done anything wrong. Well, that's frankly not true. When you look at actual stats and financial figures from the 20th century, you'll see that that's frankly not true. They're being told that the Nazis were a right-wing group, when that's frankly not true. That they're actually a left-wing group, and that there were no right-wing groups in Germany during that period, and that they weren't even allowed. And this is what they're being taught out there in these schools. They're being taught that basically is feelings matter more than actual facts, which is completely ruining these students that actually come in and actually want to learn. If you come in and want to learn, you should not be turned into some political activist for this being brainwashed. And they're turning schools into cults. This is why free education is not worth it. What needs to happen is most of these places need to be cleared out of all of these garbage teachers and people that actually want to actually teach real facts and actually want to actually teach need to be put there and actually earn quality salaries and be judged based on their merit, need to be put at the top, and other people need to be put well at the bottom and fired for incompetence. And then when it comes down to public aid and what money goes out to charities from the government, that needs to be completely cut. Nobody needs any of this money. When you see the government putting money towards sciences, they don't need that, because what ends up happening is the government is essentially a political entity. Most of these politicians are lawyers. The way lawyers figure out facts is not by actual scientific process. They figure out completely differently. They actually come up with their conclusion and try to grasp toward facts that come up with a conclusion. When they give out money, they give out money for that actual process. This means they have their conclusion, they give out money to different scientific groups to come up with that conclusion. This is why when you give out money to scientific groups, they're only going to get their money renewed if they come up with what the government conclusion was. This is why you're going to say, but with like global warming, though there's a 97% consensus. That's because there's money behind it. And these governments and NGOs say, if you don't come up with this conclusion, your money goes away. This is the whole problem with these situations. When that money goes away, they're going to agree with anything the government's going to state. They're going to even change around data. And even NOAA has admitted to fudging the data on the numbers to actually fit to government agendas to ensure that they continue to get funding as a department. This is the way things go. You also find the same thing from these colleges that get funding for these things of climate studies, and this is what ends up happening. They do this to assume that to basically continue getting their money from the government, because if they end up actually producing something that's contrary to what the government wants, of the actual production of climate change or something like that, and proves that it's not there, or it's not there to the level that they assume, that all of their funding or part of their funding gets cut. This is the way all of this stuff works. Now, I hate to tell you people out there, but this is the way the bureaucracy of funding for sciences works. This is why you really can't have any science out there that's anything other than privately funded. This is why it goes back. That's still another type of thing of public aid, is funding for the sciences and funding for the arts. All of this stuff needs to be cut because you end up getting an inferior product. You end up paying for garbage that's not anywhere close to what you want. You're not actually helping people. If you want to actually help people, you need either private charities to do it, or actually private entities to step up and actually pay for this stuff. You're not going to get it through these non-governmental agencies that have an actual agenda behind them, and actual governments themselves, because they have an idea of what they want, and they're going to stick to it. This is the same thing when it comes to public aid for such things as welfare and food stamps and agricultural subsidies. This is the whole thing. Such as the agricultural subsidies, if you look at that, they'll change out the definition of what a farm is to ensure that corporate farms make their money. Now, do you consider a horse farm an actual agricultural production farm? No. The reason why is because they don't produce crops. They actually just raise horses. Well, they consider this as an agricultural production farm to ensure that when people see it in the actual numbers for the actual revenue from agricultural production, that they actually see it as something that can be viewed as a lowering of the numbers. So then when you see these numbers, you're going to say, oh my God, farmers only making that much? And then you see that amount and you see that it's actually something well below of what it really is. When in fact, you can go to almost any town across the U.S. and often farmers are usually the richest family within the town, especially when you get out to these rural towns. The local farmer is probably the richest guy. That's even on these small like corn farms or wheat farms. If you get into these corporate farms, those are beyond wealthy, and they're the ones a lot of times using these subsidies to basically make themselves beyond wealthy. These things all they do is they just raise the price of food, because government's intervening in the actual cost of food by doing this. They're not actually helping anyone out except basically making the rich richer in this case. And basically it makes the people who have to buy food, like the middle class and the poor, it makes their ability to buy food, it makes it harder because you're raising the cost of food when it shouldn't, well above its natural price. And this goes into the fact of economics. Then when it comes down to the idea of other types of aids like food stamps and welfare, you really don't need that, because the fact is as I've shown, people are more than willing to give. They're more than willing to give well beyond the expectations of what people could even think of what they're willing to give. And this shows you that they're more than willing to give to basically help people out. And this will lead to helping people out for housing, helping people out for food. Most people and most churches are willing to what I call help people out for housing and food. And most areas with it have churches that do free food for people of like even just middle and lower class people, and it's to help out people, and it ends up working to help out the community and make the community closer. And this is not just for just certain communities. It's basically for all communities across the U.S. And when you basically get rid of all of these extra things that the government's doing, you're going to see that it's basically you don't really need them in the way. They basically are an obstruction to what they do in the long run. What we need to view it as is what the government should be doing is a minimal amount of things. They don't need to be actually in the lives of people. What it comes down to is they need to be just basically as minimal as possible, and only what it says barely in the scope of the Constitution, nothing more. So what it says in the Constitution, what it and the hard limits it gives them is what they should have. And it should be viewed in that way. And when people view it in that way, you're going to see that basically as people have a lot more freedom, are a lot happier with their lives, and are able to rise out of poverty a lot quicker. When the actual community helps pick themselves up, then if there's some distant person that's paying for some other person's food and shelter, that's basically being told, no, you can't get out of this poverty, and you're going to be stuck here forever. And for the fact is, it's going to be this way forever, and it's so-and-so's fault. And keep voting for me because I'm giving you this free stuff. And this is the way it's. This is why you find just perpetually poor societies or communities within the United States, is because they're fed these lies of that people are perpetually poor, and this is what happens. Well, the fact is this is not the case. What ended up happening is there's a lot of economic policies that created this, such as minimum wage. Minimum wage, when it was created, it was to ensure that the southern black workers that came up looking for work in the north were not able to take jobs away from the union workers of the north. When they came up from the south going north, they wanted to ensure that they had no ability to essentially get those jobs of any type of job. And this is why they created a minimum wage. It was to block it. It was not to raise any type of standard, but essentially to create a block. They knew essentially if they raised the minimum wage up high enough that basically no matter the actual level of production would not be worth it economically to any business, so they would stay with a union worker. And this is why it was created. When you look at other things, such as that people end up pointing to, such as they'll say Roe v. Wade. Well, Roe v. Wade is another thing that when people point at. Roe v. Wade is not for abortions totally. It's actually for elective abortions. This means where it has nothing to do with the life of the mother, or in cases of rape or incest. This is only this is only voluntary, because there were abortions allowed previous to this point, but they had to be validated, and they had to be validated for those reasons. And if they could not be, it wasn't allowed, because of the fact of you couldn't use the thing of this child is just an inconvenience. You had to bring it to term and give it up for adoption. You couldn't go through this cruel process of essentially killing an infant for the crime of being inconvenient. And you'll probably notice right at this point that I am fully pro-life. I'm anti-war. I'm against war. I'm against the death penalty, and I'm against abortion. I do not believe in it. Even in the case even in any case, because the fact is I believe that life should be respected. But when it comes down to this, is that's another thing that essentially that people are forced to subsidize, and it was basically made for people to believe that this was women's rights or women's health, and really that's not the case. It's not it's not what keeps a woman healthy, and it's not something anywhere close to that. If it were, it would be basically for actually the birth of a child, not the death of a child. And that's really what it's about. And giving money to organizations for this process is wrong. And even if you believe in abortion, you should think of it as there should be no one charity that gets money from the government. How can one charity say, we're deserving of money from the government, but the next charity's not? If all charities essentially did that, the government debt would be astronomical. Because essentially every charity under the sun could essentially apply for money. How is Planned Parenthood more deserving than Make-A-Wish? How is Planned Parenthood more deserving than, let's say, Crisis Text Line? Now, these are things that deal with mental health and dying children's last wishes. I mean, I would feel that those would be more important than the fact of someone who has someone who wants an elective abortion, and a group that does that, and a group that's basically political. Now, these two are actually non-political entities. They don't even engage in politics. Now, why does that one group that engages in politics get money, actually $500 million a year, and yet these two non-political entities get nothing, that actually do good work, and that basically no one of any political ideology could actually disagree of their actual merit? This is why when a government's creating a budget and giving out money, they need to understand that you cannot pick a charity to give money to. No charity should be getting money out of the government budget, regardless of if you like them or not. There should be no charity getting money. There should be no endowments getting money. None of that. That's all garbage. It should only be for the actual function of the government. That's it. Just the bare function of the government. nothing else, and that this is what keeps everything running smoothly. It should be basically, if anything beyond the three branches of the government, just to basically keep them functioning, and that's it. No other things of any black projects or anything else. No other no other R&D money, none of that garbage. No grants to schools, none of this. It should be just raw. The executive should be able to get its money. The legislative should get its money, and the judicial should get its money. That's it. Nothing more. It's really just that simple. Now, what ends up happening is they'll go, oh, we need this pet project here, pet project there, pet project here. No, we don't need any of this stuff. We just need a bare bones, and this is why we have a debt that's over $21 trillion, which is basically more than the per capita income of our whole nation. And this is insane. That means basically if everyone donated their checks for the whole year, it still wouldn't pay down the debt. And that's pathetic. And that shows you where we're at right now. That if everyone gave up all of their money in the United States, we'd still be behind. It would take more than a year to do this. This assumes that we're probably grazing on grass. That not because we'd still have to sell off all of our commodities during the year and give them away to our creditors to essentially break even. This means selling it all overseas to whoever would buy it. That means we could not eat any of this stuff. And that's where we're sitting at. That's why this debate on public aid is really important. Now, most people are going to say that on this, that you're going to probably state that this is just a right-wing versus left-wing idea and we can afford it. But the fact is we can't, because this is what's causing our economy to slow down, and to a great deal, because we don't have the money. You can't rely on a fiat currency, number one. Number two is the government doesn't just print its own money. That's not how economics works. When you do that, you're going to isolate yourself from the world. No one's going to want to accept your currency if you do that. They're going to say you're basically printing toilet paper. It's no different. When you do that and you say, oh, no one has to pay taxes, we're just going to print money. Well, what happens with it is your economy is only as good as what's going to be produced within the walls of your nation, because no one else is going to accept anything. And that debt is that debt is going to still pile up because no one's going to accept anything. They're going to then say, we want raw product. And if you don't give them raw product, your debt's going to be continually going up. And you can't just keep adding on more things with it. You're then going to be forced with cutting actual programs. So the idea of we can add more programs with it is done. This is where we're sitting at right now. That's why the idea that I bring this up with it is we need to accept the idea of charity is the solution and it is the future, and we need to accept that. I hope all of you enjoyed this. If you did, like, subscribe, and click the bell. And I will see you later today when I discuss my podcast on the Iran situation. And see you later today. Bye.